Get out of my seat. Get out of my seat right now, or I will have you dragged off this aircraft in front of every single person watching." The words hit the cabin like a glass dropped on marble. Danielle Foster did not flinch. Her hand stayed exactly where it was, resting beside an open laptop, 3 fingers still touching the trackpad, as if the sentence had not been aimed at her at all. Her boarding pass lay flat on the tray table, corner curled slightly from the New Jersey humidity outside. Beside it sat a glass of water, the ice inside it half melted, ordinary, unbothered, the only thing in the row that hadn't heard the threat. For 1 full second, nobody in the cabin moved. The recessed lights above the aisle glowed soft gold against cream leather. Somewhere behind row 4, a rolling bag's wheel clicked once against the overhead bin and went quiet, like even the luggage knew better than to make noise right now. Priya, Anand, the lead flight attendant for Meridian Skyways, Flight 719, stood over Danielle with a smile stretched so tight it had stopped reaching her eyes 3 sentences ago. Behind Priya, close enough that her perfume had already claimed half the row, stood Corinne Ashby Whitfield, 61 years old, dressed in cream cashmere, a diamond tennis bracelet catching the light every time she moved her wrist, which she did constantly, like punctuation. "That is my seat," Corinne said, her voice pitched low, but sharpened enough to carry to the first 4 rows without her ever raising it. "I have sat in 2A on this route for 14 years. Everyone here knows that." Danielle looked up, not startled, not afraid. Something closer to disbelief, the specific, tired disbelief of a person encountering a very old problem wearing new clothes. She was 38, dressed in a charcoal wool blazer that had seen 4 winters, dark jeans, black flats, with a small scuff on the left toe she'd never bothered to polish out. Her hair was pulled back in a low knot. No jewelry beyond a thin gold band on her right hand that had belonged to her grandmother. No scarf that announced a designer. No sound at all, really, except the quiet rhythm of a woman who had long ago learned that real power doesn't need volume to be heard. Priya held her service tablet against her chest like a shield. "There seems to be a seating conflict," she said. "Mrs. Ashby Whitfield is one of our Meridian Platinum Circle members. We'd like to ask you to relocate so we can accommodate her comfortably." Danielle reached for her boarding pass and lifted it, unhurried, the way a person moves when they already know how this ends and are simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. "My name is Danielle Foster," she said. Her voice stayed even, almost gentle. "This is my confirmed seat. I booked it 11 days ago, direct through Meridian, seat 2A, aisle. I have the confirmation number if you need it again." Priya's eyes dropped to the paper for exactly 1 second. Long enough to say she'd looked. Not long enough to have actually read it. Corinne let out a short laugh through her nose, the kind designed to be heard by an audience rather than the person it was aimed at. "Sweetheart, first class gets confusing sometimes. People click the wrong box. It happens." Across the aisle, a man in a gray suit lowered his newspaper an inch. In row 3, a woman paused mid-motion, one hand still at the clasp of her scarf. Near the back of the cabin, a phone screen woke up with a small chime nobody but its owner noticed. Danielle felt the old pressure rise behind her sternum, familiar as a scar. She'd felt it in boardrooms in Manhattan, in hotel lobbies in Miami, at galas where someone always asked who she worked for before they asked her name. The silent question underneath every polite smile. "How did you get here? Who let you in?" She had learned a long time ago not to answer that question with anger. Anger gave people exactly the story they had already written for her. So she sat a half-inch straighter instead. "I paid for this seat," she said. "I followed every rule this airline has. I will not give it up because another passenger would prefer it." Priya's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Corinne leaned in, and her perfume arrived a full second before her voice did. "You are holding up this entire flight," she whispered, sharp enough to cut. Some of us have real business waiting on the ground. The words landed soft. That was the part that made them dangerous. Everyone in earshot heard exactly what was folded inside them. Some of us. Danielle looked from Corinne to Priya and back. If there's another open seat in this cabin, she asked, why can't she sit there instead? It was a simple question. That was precisely what made it unanswerable. Priya hesitated, just a half beat too long. Corinne's expression shifted, irritation curdling fast into something closer to insult. She was not a woman accustomed to being questioned, and certainly not by a black woman, half her age, sitting in a seat Corinne believed should have simply opened itself for her, the way doors always had. Danielle's phone lit up on the tray table. A message slid across the lock screen in gray text. Vantage Point board briefing moved to 11 a.m. Ridgeline Analytics contract, ready for your final signature. Priya caught only a blur of words upside down. Corinne didn't look at all. Neither of them had any idea that the woman they were trying to move out of seat 2A was the founder and chief executive officer of the exact technology firm. Meridian Skyways' own board had spent 4 months begging to hire. The company, whose bias detection software was supposed to fix precisely the kind of failure now unfolding 11 inches from their faces. Neither of them knew Danielle held enough voting weight in that firm's cap table to end careers with a signature. Neither of them knew that seat 2A, in about 90 minutes, was going to stop being a piece of upholstery and start being evidence. I'll get the cabin supervisor, Priya said, straightening. Please do, Danielle answered, and folded her boarding pass with careful hands before setting it down beside her water glass. The cabin seemed to shrink around the three of them. Phones rose slowly, quietly, the way people raise them when they're not sure yet if what they're filming is going to matter. Corinne smiled like the ending had already been decided in her favor. Danielle Foster did not look defeated. She looked like weather, the kind that hasn't decided yet whether it's going to pass over or break the sky open. If you think you know exactly how this story ends, stay with me. Because in about 4 minutes, someone is going to make a choice on this aircraft they will spend the rest of their career trying to undo, and it is not going to be Danielle. Marcus Whitlock arrived at seat 2A, with the particular walk of a man who'd made junior staff straighten their posture before he ever reached them. He was 49, broad through the shoulders, a Navy Meridian Supervisor's jacket pressed so sharp it looked structural. A silver name badge caught the cabin light as he stopped beside Priya, and his gaze moved in a fast, practiced sweep. Corinne first, then Danielle, then the small forest of phones now pointed down the aisle. What seems to be the issue here, he said. Not really a question, more a formality he was performing for the cameras he'd already clocked. Priya exhaled, relief and guilt tangled together on her face in a way that made her look anything but innocent. This passenger is refusing to cooperate with a seating reassignment, she said. Danielle noted the phrase. This passenger. Not Miss Foster. Not the customer holding a confirmed paid ticket. Just this passenger, like a stain that needed lifting from the carpet. Marcus turned toward Danielle. His eyes moved over the blazer, the flats, the laptop, then finally reached her face. He did not look at her boarding pass first. That single detail told Danielle everything about the next 10 minutes before he'd said a word. Ma'am, Marcus said, keeping his tone low and polished the way people do when they want cruelty to sound like customer service. We're trying to keep the boarding process smooth for everyone today. Mrs. Ashby Whitfield is one of our most senior Platinum Circle members, and she has a strong, long-standing preference for this seat. Corinne gave a tiny, approving nod, as if she'd rehearsed his line with him backstage. Danielle lifted her boarding pass a second time, and I have a confirmed, paid reservation for this exact seat. Marcus glanced at the paper for just long enough to claim later that he had checked it. No one is saying there isn't documentation, he said. There may well be documentation. The cabin tightened around that sentence like a fist. A man in row 1 stopped fiddling with his cufflink. A woman near the aisle frowned openly. Somewhere behind Danielle, a phone rose another 6 inches. "There is documentation," Danielle said, voice level. "Not maybe. There is." Marcus clasped his hands in front of him, a gesture that was meant to look calm and instead looked rehearsed. "What we're offering is very simple. We can move you to another first-class seat. Same service, same amenities." Danielle looked past him, scanning the cabin, then back to Corinne. Then why can't she take that seat instead? The question landed clean and exposed. Corinne's lips parted. Her pearl earrings trembled as her head snapped toward Danielle. "That is not the point," Corinne said. "It is exactly the point," Danielle replied. Quiet. That was what made it impossible to shrug off. Corinne's eyes cut toward Marcus, pleading with him silently to end this fast. Before the phones turned into permanent witnesses. Before every sentence in this aisle became something a lawyer could quote back to her later. Marcus leaned in, dropping his voice into the register men, use when they think intimidation sounds more respectable in private. "Miss Foster," he said, "I'd strongly advise you not to make this difficult for yourself." Danielle felt the air change against her skin. There it was, not policy, not procedure, a threat wearing a lanyard. She looked at him and found no curiosity in his face at all, no interest in understanding what had actually happened, only the reflexive defense of a hierarchy he'd mistaken, his whole career, for order itself. "I am not making anything difficult," she said. "I am sitting in the seat I paid for." Corinne exhaled sharply and rounded on Priya. "This is absurd. I have flown this exact route for 14 years. Everyone on this crew knows where I sit." Her voice cracked slightly, not from fear, from insult. In her mind, the injury was never that a seat had been withheld from her. The injury was that Danielle had refused to disappear on command, the way everyone always had before. Priya stepped half a pace closer to Corinne, her whole posture folding softer, almost apologetic. "I am so sorry, Mrs. Ashby Whitfield," she murmured. "We're handling it right now." Danielle watched the apology land in exactly the wrong direction, and something old and quiet moved through her chest. Not weakness, not surprise. Something closer to memory. She thought of her father, 61, standing at the counter of a Newark hardware store with a receipt trembling slightly in his hand, being asked a third time if he was certain. The credit card in his wallet was actually his own. She thought of her mother's hand on his arm afterward in the parking lot, voice low. "Stand tall. Don't hand them the anger they came looking for." So Danielle stayed still. "Mr. Whitlock," she said, "please check the reservation system yourself. My ticket is valid. My status with this airline is valid. My seat assignment is valid." Marcus's mouth tightened. The system isn't the only factor at play here. For a moment, nobody in first class breathed. A woman in row 3 whispered to her seatmate, "Did he really just say that out loud?" Marcus heard her. A slow red flush crawled up his neck. Watch Corinne's hand right now. Watch what she does with it in the next 10 seconds, because it is going to come back later in a boardroom 11 floors above Manhattan, and by then it will be far too late for her to take it back. Corinne stepped closer to Priya, under the pretense of adjusting the strap on her cream leather handbag. Her fingers moved fast. Something folded and green slipped from her palm into Priya's, quick, practiced, almost invisible. Almost. Danielle saw Priya's hand close around it. So did a young woman in row 4, wearing a gray university sweatshirt. 22 years old. Headphones around her neck, thumb frozen over her phone screen. Her name was Reina Castillo, and she was flying home to Trenton to see her father 3 days after his second surgery. She hated confrontation with every cell in her body. But her thumb stayed exactly where it was, steady, because some wrongs, once you've actually seen them, ask something of you, whether you want them to or not. Priya tucked her closed fist near her jacket pocket. Marcus looked away at precisely the wrong moment, or precisely the intended one. Corinne lifted her chin. "I trust Meridian still knows how to take care of its real customers," she said. The sentence dropped into the cabin like a lit match onto dry grass. Danielle placed her platinum card on the tray table, slow and deliberate. Then her boarding pass beside it. Then her phone, screen facing up. Another notification slid across the glass. Board seats confirmed for 11 a.m., awaiting final approval on the Meridian Services proposal. Marcus didn't notice. Priya didn't notice. Corinne didn't notice. Raina's camera did. Danielle took one slow breath, the kind a person takes right before choosing not to brake, and looked directly at Marcus Whitlock. "I will not be moving," she said. Marcus Whitlock stared at her, like her refusal had broken something older than the airline itself. "Miss Foster," he said, each word bitten off short, "this aircraft cannot depart while we have an unresolved passenger interference issue." "I am not interfering with anything," Danielle answered. "I am seated." A murmur rolled quietly through first class. Corinne heard it and hated the sound of it because the cabin was shifting under her feet in real time. Newspapers lowered. Phones tilted higher. Eyes that had been sliding away from Danielle now turned toward her instead. Not with suspicion anymore, but with something that looked unmistakably like concern. "This is ridiculous," Corinne snapped. "She's making a scene." Danielle turned her head slightly. "No, Mrs. Ashby Whitfield, you are." 6 words. They landed like glass breaking on tile. Corinne's face flushed dark red. She scanned the cabin for support, a nod, a laugh, any sign that the old order she'd relied on her entire life was still intact. Nobody gave it to her. A silver-haired woman in row 3 watched Corinne with open, undisguised disappointment. Across the aisle, a businessman set his phone face down and murmured to his wife, low but audible, "She has the ticket." Priya shifted near the galley, her fingers brushing the pocket where Corinne's folded bills had disappeared. The paper felt hot now, too hot, like a secret that had just learned it could burn her. Marcus stepped closer, filling the aisle. "Lower your tone," he said. "My tone is already low," Danielle replied. A few passengers exchanged glances. It was the kind of sentence people remember weeks later, verbatim, because it was simple, exact, and impossible to twist unless someone wanted very badly to lie about it. Marcus's patience, thin to begin with, finally snapped its last thread. "Meridian policy gives crew discretion to resolve seating conflicts," he said. "There is no conflict in the system," Danielle answered. "There is only a passenger refusing her assigned seat, and a crew choosing to pressure the wrong person into leaving." Priya's eyes flicked toward Corinne. Too fast. Too obvious. Raina's camera caught every frame of it. Corinne leaned toward Marcus, voice dropping into something sharp and commanding. "Are you actually going to let her speak to you this way?" Not a request. Never a request. A command dressed up as offense. Marcus straightened, and pride finally shoved judgment entirely out of the room. "Miss Foster, this is your final opportunity to accept an alternate seat voluntarily." Danielle's phone lit up again, on the tray table. "Corinne Vasquez, Chief of Staff. Board packet finalized. They're waiting on you in Manhattan." Danielle turned the phone face down without a word. Nobody in that cabin had the smallest idea of the scale of what they were about to interrupt. Nobody knew Meridian Skyways' formal complaint numbers had climbed for 7 straight quarters. Nobody knew Ridgeline Analytics had spent 8 months building the exact bias detection platform Meridian's own board had begged, in writing, to pilot. Nobody knew Danielle had spent the better part of a year quietly deciding whether this airline's culture could even be salvaged, or whether it was already too far gone to save. She looked back up at Marcus. "I will not accept another seat," she said. Marcus's eyes went flat and cold. "Then I will notify the captain." The words rolled through the cabin like distant thunder that hasn't found its lightning yet. Priya's face drained pale. She had wanted this handled quietly, Not with this many phones recording, and absolutely not with a folded wad of cash still burning a hole against her ribs. She thought about the internal review that was coming, her employee number, her mortgage, her younger brother in Camden who needed help covering his dialysis bills. Fear pressed hard against whatever conscience she had left. Fear won. Corinne smiled, small and satisfied and almost cruel. "Thank you," she whispered. Marcus turned and strode toward the forward gallery, his shoes striking the carpet in short, angry beats. Danielle stayed seated, hands folded in her lap, spine straight, watching the ground crew move beneath the wing in bright orange vests through the oval window. Entirely unaware that a quiet war was unfolding 11 feet above their heads in cold recycled air and polished leather. The other passengers were watching Danielle differently now. Not as a disturbance anymore. As a measurement, a test of exactly how much they themselves were willing to tolerate before they, too, would have to decide what kind of people they were going to be for the rest of this flight. Raina swallowed hard and zoomed in tighter. She didn't know Danielle's full identity yet. She only knew that injustice, up close, had a face, a voice, and a seat number. At the front of the cabin, Marcus lifted the interphone and spoke low and fast. Seconds later, the cockpit door swung open. Captain Russell Boone stepped out. 60 years old, silver hair cropped close, broad through the chest, 4 gold stripes gleaming on each shoulder. A face carved by 3 decades of unquestioned command. The cabin went completely silent. If you're waiting for someone to finally get on Danielle's side, keep watching, because the next 3 minutes are going to test every single person in this cabin, and not everyone is going to pass. Captain Boone walked the aisle with the unhurried authority of a man who had never once in 31 years been told no and had it stick. He stopped at row 2, hands clasped loosely behind his back, and studied Danielle the way a person studies a math problem they've already decided has a wrong answer. "Ma'am," he said, "I understand there's a seating dispute holding up our departure." "There is no dispute," Danielle answered. "I am in my assigned seat." Boone's eyes flicked toward Marcus, toward Priya, toward Corinne, and something unspoken passed between all 3 of them. A kind of silent agreement Danielle recognized instantly because she had seen it 100 times in 100 rooms. The agreement that says we already know who we're going to believe here, we just need her to make it official. "I'm going to need you to comply with crew instructions," Boone said. "If you don't, I'm within my rights to have security remove you upon return to the gate and file a formal report that could affect your ability to fly with this airline in the future." A ripple moved through the cabin. Raina's hand tightened around her phone. Danielle looked up at him, calm as still water. "Am I being accused of a crime, Captain? No, am I a threat to the safety of this aircraft?" Silence. A silence with real weight to it, the kind that makes itself heard. "Then you have no legal basis to remove me from a seat I purchased and legally hold," Danielle said. "And if you attempt to, I promise you, Captain, that decision will follow you." Boone's jaw flexed. "Turn the plane around," he said to Marcus. "We're returning to the gate." The cabin erupted into a low, disbelieving murmur. A man near the front stood halfway up before his wife pulled him back down by the sleeve. An older woman in row 3, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, rose fully to her feet. "This is wrong," she said, loud enough for half the cabin to hear. "She has a ticket. I watched her show it to you 3 times. "Sit down, ma'am," Marcus said. "I will not," the woman answered. "My name is Eleanor Vance. I've flown this airline for 20 years, and I am telling you, in front of everyone here, that what you are doing right now is discrimination, and I will say so to whoever asks me." Her husband, silent until now, reached over and squeezed her hand once. Support without a single word. It was the smallest gesture in the world, and it was the only one anyone had offered Danielle since this began. 20 minutes later, Flight 719 sat back at the gate. 2 uniformed airport security officers walked up the jet bridge. Danielle rose from her seat without being asked twice, gathered her tote and laptop with steady hands, and looked directly at Marcus Whitlock. "You are going to regret this decision more than any decision you have made in your career," she said. Not as a threat, as a simple fact delivered the way you'd read someone a weather report. Marcus said nothing. He believed, in that exact moment, that he had won. He had no idea he had just handed Danielle Foster the one thing she needed most. Proof. Danielle walked down that aisle with her chin level and her shoulders square, past 41 strangers who would spend the rest of their lives remembering exactly how she'd looked doing it. Raina's camera followed her the entire way, capturing the silence, the stillness, the particular dignity of a woman who refused to give her humiliation an audience reaction. At the door, a flight attendant Danielle had never spoken to. A young man named Julian Ferris, 26 years old, 3 months into the job, quietly pressed a bottle of water into her hand. He said nothing. He didn't need to. It was the only decent thing offered to her by Meridian's crew in the entire ordeal, and Danielle would remember his face for the rest of her life. She stepped off Flight 719 at 9:47 that morning, walked through the jet bridge alone, and by 10:03, she was sitting in a private lounge 2 terminals over, laptop open, phone against her ear. "Raymond Okafor," she said, once. He picked up. "I need you to pull everything Ridgeline has on Meridian Skyways. Every complaint filed against this airline in the last 3 years. I want it by noon." Raymond Okafor was Ridgeline Analytics' general counsel, a former federal prosecutor with steel in his voice and absolutely no patience for corporate excuses. "Danielle," he said, "what happened?" "They just removed their own future business partner from a paid seat because a Platinum Circle member decided she didn't like sharing a cabin with someone who looked like me," Danielle said. "And they have no idea yet who they just did that to." There was a pause on the line, and then, very quietly, Raymond said, "Send me everything you have." By 10:20, Reina Castillo's video had 11,000 views. By 10:50, it had 200,000. Somewhere in Trenton, a woman she would never meet had already reposted it with a caption that read simply, "Watch how they treat a black woman with a valid ticket. Then watch what they don't know she is. Do not look away yet." What happens next is the part that turns a bad morning into a reckoning, and it starts with a phone ringing in a Chicago boardroom that nobody there was ready to answer. At 11:14, Charles Winslow, chairman of Meridian Skyways Board of Directors, stood in a glass-walled conference room on the 41st floor of the airline's Chicago headquarters, staring at a laptop screen that would not stop refreshing. Notifications piled on top of notifications. His chief communications officer, a woman named Diane Prescott, stood beside him with both hands pressed flat against the table, as if the table itself might steady her. "We have a serious problem," she said. "I can see that," Charles answered. The video had a name attached to it now, thanks to a passenger who'd recognized Danielle from a Bloomberg feature 6 months earlier. Ridgeline Analytics CEO Danielle Foster removed from Meridian Skyways flight after refusing to give up paid seat to wealthy white passenger. The headline was already circling 3 continents. Charles's phone buzzed. Board members confirming for the emergency call, his assistant said through the intercom. "Also, Ms. Foster's office has requested a call with you directly. Her general counsel is already on the line." "Put her through," Charles said, and sat down heavily, feeling every one of his 58 years settle into his spine at once. Danielle's voice came through clear and unhurried, exactly as it had sounded on that plane 3 hours earlier. "Mr. Winslow," she said, "before we go any further, I want the record to reflect that the word incident is not sufficient for what happened this morning." Charles closed his eyes. "Miss Foster, I want to personally apologize." This wasn't a delayed bag, Danielle continued, as though he hadn't spoken at all. It wasn't a missed connection, or an unfortunate misunderstanding. A paying black passenger was pressured, threatened, and ultimately removed from a confirmed first-class seat to satisfy the preference of a wealthy white passenger who had just handed your lead flight attendant cash in plain view of witnesses. Your captain backed the decision without once checking my documentation. Your supervisor threatened my future access to this airline for the crime of sitting still. Silence hummed on the line. I have video, Danielle said. I have timestamps. I have the platinum card I placed on that tray table that your crew never once looked at. And I have a board of my own that is going to ask me, this afternoon, exactly why Ridgeline Analytics should sign a $50 million contract with an airline whose culture allowed this to happen in full view of 40 passengers. Charles's throat went dry. What do you want? He managed. I want an emergency shareholder meeting today, Danielle said. Full attendance. Legal present, HR present, communications present. I will present my evidence, and then I will present my demands. Watch Charles Winslow's face right now, because in about 6 hours, it is going to look 10 years older than it does in this moment, and every single wrinkle will be one his own airline carved into it. By 3 that afternoon, Meridian Skyways emergency board meeting had assembled on video. 22 faces arranged in a grid, none of them touching the coffee sitting cold in front of them. Danielle appeared from Ridgeline's Manhattan conference room, wearing the exact same charcoal blazer she'd had on that morning. No dramatic wardrobe change. No visible attempt to look wounded. That, more than anything else, was what unsettled the room. She looked prepared, not damaged. Beside her sat Raymond Okafor and her chief of staff, Corinne Vasquez, who had spent the last 4 hours organizing evidence with the precision of someone building a case for federal court. Ms. Foster, Charles began. Thank you for joining on short notice. We're here to discuss this morning's incident on Flight 719. Before we begin, Danielle said, I'd like the record to reflect that the word incident undersells what happened. Charles froze mid-breath. Danielle nodded to Raymond, who shared his screen. The first clip played. Priya standing over Danielle. Corinne behind her, chin lifted, insisting she always sat in that seat. Danielle holding up her boarding pass, her platinum card, her voice calm and clear through the boardroom speakers. This is my assigned seat. Nobody moved. The second clip played. Corinne leaning toward Priya, folded bills sliding from palm to palm, Priya's fingers closing around them. Marcus looking deliberately away. A communications director covered her mouth with one hand. The third clip played. Captain Boone's voice, flat and final. Turn the plane around. Then Danielle's voice again. Am I being accused of a crime, Captain? No. Am I a threat to the safety of this aircraft? The pause on that recording was devastating in a way no editing could have manufactured. Charles closed his eyes. The evidence didn't shout. It never needed to. It simply sat there, clean and cold and impossible to spin. When the clips ended, Danielle spoke again. I want to know who trained your crew to believe this was acceptable, she said. Nobody answered. She looked from face to face across the grid. And if nobody trained them to do this, then I want to know who allowed this culture to grow until they felt safe enough to do it in front of 40 witnesses. Martin Ashcroft, one of the longest-serving directors on the board, cleared his throat. Miss Foster, what happened this morning was clearly unacceptable, but moving straight to termination before a full internal review could expose the company to wrongful termination claims from the employees involved. Raymond Okafor spoke without raising his voice, which somehow made it land harder. Mr. Ashcroft, your company is already exposed. The only remaining question is whether you intend to reduce the harm or spend the next 18 months defending it in front of a jury. Corinne Vasquez added, quietly, we currently have 6 witness statements, 4 passenger videos, 1 audio recording of the crew discussing the incident afterward in the galley, and a public engagement curve. that is accelerating by the minute. This is not going to slow down on its own. Charles glanced toward Diane Prescott. She leaned close to his ear and whispered 5 words that landed in the silence of the whole call. "We have lost the narrative." Danielle heard it anyway. "You lost the narrative the moment your crew chose the wrong side of the truth," she said. That sentence ended the debate entirely. For the next 25 minutes, the board reviewed the formal internal report Raymond's team had assembled. Priya Anand had accepted cash from a passenger in exchange for pressuring another passenger out of her seat. Marcus Whitlock had escalated the situation despitefully, verified documentation being presented to him twice. Captain Boone had ordered a passenger's removal without independently confirming any part of the underlying claim. Corinne Ashby Whitfield had misrepresented her entitlement to a specific seat and used cash to manipulate airline staff into enforcing that lie. By the end of the reading, even Martin Ashcroft had stopped objecting. Charles looked older by the minute, the particular kind of older that arrives when a man finally sees the true cost of something he'd spent years preferring not to look at directly. "We're prepared," he said slowly, "to place the 3 employees on immediate suspension, pending review." Danielle's expression didn't soften at all. "No," she said. The room tightened around that single syllable. "They didn't suspend my humiliation pending review," Danielle said. "They didn't pause my removal while someone looked into it. They acted immediately when they believed I had no power at all. Meridian Skyways is going to act with that exact same speed, now that the truth has power behind it." Charles lowered his gaze. The vote was called. One by one, 22 directors answered, "Yes, yes, yes, yes." Termination with cause for Priya Anand, Marcus Whitlock, and Captain Russell Boone. Immediate public disclosure of the full incident. Preservation of all internal communications. Full cooperation with Danielle's legal team. A formal referral of the cash exchange to outside counsel and, pending review, to local law enforcement. Permanent revocation of Corinne Ashby Whitfield's Platinum Circle status, along with a review of her ongoing flight privileges across the airline's entire network. When the final vote passed, nobody on that call celebrated. There was nothing in the room that felt like a victory. There was only the particular silence of people who had finally been forced to look directly at something they'd spent years choosing not to see. At 31,000 feet, on a different aircraft entirely, the story had already outrun everyone connected to it. And the 3 people about to receive the airline's decision had no idea it was already sitting in their inbox. Captain Boone received his termination notice through company operations while descending into a connecting flight 2 states away. "You are relieved of duty effective immediately. Do not operate further flights. Report to corporate security upon landing." His hand trembled slightly against the tablet screen. 31 years, gone in 4 lines of corporate text. Marcus Whitlock received the same notice in an airport lounge in Denver, his face going gray as he read it twice, then a 3rd time, as if repetition might change the words. Priya Anand read hers alone in her car in a Meridian employee parking lot and began crying without any sound at all, both hands pressed flat against the steering wheel. Corinne Ashby Whitfield's phone buzzed with a call from her own law firm, requesting an emergency ethics consultation. She stared at the notification for a long moment, then looked down at her hand, the one that had folded cash into a stranger's palm that morning, like it was the most natural transaction in the world. For the first time since boarding flight 719, it occurred to her that the seat she'd taken by force had never actually belonged to her. And now it felt far too large, too exposed, for anything she had left to fill it with. 3 days after the vote, Meridian Skyways halted every domestic departure for an entire morning. Not weather. Not a computer outage. A single woman's refusal to disappear on command had, within 72 hours, grounded an entire national fleet for retraining. Across the country, Passengers stood at gates, staring up at departure boards that read delayed, operational review in progress. Most groaned, checked their phones out of boredom, and then stopped groaning entirely once they saw exactly what was trending. They saw Danielle Foster walking off Flight 719 with her chin level. They saw Priya's hand closing around folded cash. They saw Corinne's satisfied little smile, the one that made it look like someone else's humiliation had simply been a service upgrade she'd ordered off a menu. By noon, Meridian's chief executive stood before a bank of cameras in Chicago and read a statement that did not once use the word misunderstanding. It used the word failure. It used the word discrimination. It used the word accountability 3 separate times, deliberately. Danielle watched the broadcast from her office on the 33rd floor of the Ridgeline building, arms folded, face still. Corinne Vasquez stood beside her. Raymond Okafor sat near the window with a legal pad on his knee that, for once, he wasn't writing on. Ms. Foster had a valid confirmed ticket, the executive said, voice carrying across the newsroom feed. She had every right to remain in her assigned seat. Our employees failed her. Our systems failed her. Our culture failed her. Danielle looked down for a moment, not in triumph, in something closer to grief, because the truth had finally, publicly, been said out loud, and still, it could not undo the walk down that aisle. It could not erase 40 pairs of eyes watching her gather her bag. It could not quiet the part of her that had, for one long, terrible minute, at 31,000 feet, felt exactly 9 years old again, learning for the first time that proof was never quite enough for some people. Corinne touched her shoulder gently. They said it, she said. Danielle nodded. Yes, she said quietly. Now they have to actually live it. The following week, Meridian held a mandatory company-wide town hall at its Chicago training center. Pilots, flight attendants, gate agents, security coordinators, and senior executives filled an auditorium built for 800 people. Some looked ashamed. Some looked angry. Some looked simply, bone-deep, exhausted. Danielle walked onto the stage without music, without applause, without introduction of any kind. Priya sat near the back beside her attorney, eyes swollen from days of crying. Marcus sat 2 rows ahead of her, hands locked together in his lap so tightly his knuckles had gone pale. Captain Boone sat near the center aisle, no stripes on his shoulders anymore, wearing a plain gray suit that made him look a full decade older than he had in uniform. Danielle looked out at all of them, then let the silence sit for a long moment before she spoke. I could make this entirely about punishment, she said. And some punishment was absolutely necessary. Without accountability, an apology is nothing but public relations dressed up in a suit. The room stayed completely silent. But punishment alone doesn't teach a company how to actually see people, Danielle continued. It only teaches people how to avoid getting caught next time. She let that land. Every single person who boards an aircraft brings more than a ticket with them. They bring a whole life, a family, a history nobody in that cabin can see, a fear they may never say out loud, a burden you will never know about unless you choose to look past your own assumptions. Priya covered her mouth with one hand. Your job was never to decide who looked worthy of dignity, Danielle said, her voice never once rising. Your job is to provide it. Full stop. No exceptions for who's paying more. No exceptions for who looks like they belong and who doesn't. She paused. That morning, the real question was never whether I belonged in seat 2A. The record already answered that question the moment I booked the ticket. The actual question was whether this company would honor the truth when the person holding it didn't look powerful enough to matter. Another pause, longer this time, and you failed that test, she said. Nobody in that auditorium moved for a long moment. Then, slowly, Priya rose to her feet. Her attorney reached for her arm to stop her. She shook her head and stayed standing. I accepted the money, Priya said, voice breaking on nearly every word. I told myself it was just a tip. I told myself I needed this job more than I needed to do the right thing. I told myself Mrs. Ashby Whitfield mattered more, because this whole company had spent years training me to treat her like she did. She looked directly at Danielle. I was wrong, she said. I am so sorry. The apology didn't fix everything. It couldn't. But it entered the room honestly, and honest things carry a different kind of weight than rehearsed ones. Danielle simply nodded once, and let the silence hold what words couldn't. 6 months later, Meridian Skyways launched a new company-wide passenger dignity standard across every single department. Bias intervention training became mandatory for every employee, including senior executives. Crew escalation protocols were completely rewritten. Any seat dispute now required documented, verified confirmation before a passenger could be removed from an aircraft under any circumstance. All passenger complaints were routed through a newly created, fully independent ethics review board, with authority the previous internal system had never had. Reina Castillo received an award from a regional journalism association for the footage that had started it all. She used the honorarium to help cover the rest of her father's medical bills, and later said in an interview that she almost hadn't hit record, that her thumb had hovered for nearly 10 full seconds before she'd finally pressed the button, and that those 10 seconds were the ones she thought about most. Afterward, whenever she second-guessed herself about anything, Eleanor Vance and her husband received a personal letter of thanks from Danielle herself, along with lifetime platinum status on Ridgeline's own corporate travel accounts, which Danielle controlled personally and offered to almost no one. Corinne Ashby Whitfield resigned from every charitable board she'd ever sat on within 8 weeks of the ethics inquiry that followed her. Her name quietly disappeared from gala invitations, museum donor walls, and the exclusive country club newsletter she'd appeared in for 2 straight decades. The law firm where her late husband had once been a named partner distanced itself from her publicly within the month. She was never charged criminally. The transaction, while ethically indefensible, fell into a gray area her own attorneys carefully exploited. But the social world she had spent 61 years assuming would always protect her simply, quietly, permanently stopped answering her calls. One afternoon, nearly a year later, Danielle happened to see her from a distance at a downtown Manhattan restaurant, sitting alone at a small table near the window. No assistant, no entourage. Studying a menu she didn't seem to actually be reading. Danielle didn't approach her. She didn't need to. There was nothing left to say that the last 12 months hadn't already said far more effectively than words could. Danielle signed Ridgeline's $50 million contract with Meridian Skyways only after every single reform had been implemented, independently audited, and made fully public. Not one day before. Late one evening, nearly a year after Flight 719, Danielle stood alone in her office on the 33rd floor, looking out over a Manhattan skyline glittering beneath her like scattered stars fallen out of the sky. She thought about her father in that Newark hardware store, receipt shaking slightly in his hand. She thought about her mother's whisper in the parking lot afterward. Stand tall, make them hear you. Don't become the thing that hurt you. Danielle closed her eyes and breathed once, slow and complete. Seat 2A had never really been just a seat. It had become a mirror. And for one airline, one cabin, and millions of strangers watching from their phones, that mirror had finally, undeniably, reflected the truth back at everyone who'd been too comfortable to look at it directly before. Dignity was never a privilege to be earned through status, or wealth, or age, or the color of your skin. It belonged to everyone, in every seat, on every single flight, whether anyone chose to recognize that fact or not. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who still believes that respect is a small thing. Sometimes it is the only thing that changes everything. If this story made you feel something, not just because of how it ended, but because you recognize someone in it, maybe even yourself. Hit like so it reaches someone who needs to hear it today. Share it with anyone who's ever needed reminding that they are not invisible. And leave a comment. Have you ever been in that cabin? And if you have, which side were you standing on? I read every single one.